I'm thrilled once again to introduce our speaker, Shilo George. Shilo uses she, they pronouns and is a Southern Cheyenne Arapaho and Irish Scottish international speaker, is the owner of Lush Cumtux Tum Tum Consulting, which means a great awakening of the heart and spirit in the Chinook Wawa
Should
trade language. With over 20 years of experience as a social worker and community educator, Shilo's work focuses on trauma-informed practices that align with and support anti-racist and anti-oppression efforts within organizations and communities. Their values are deeply rooted in Native cultural and spiritual practices, and she draws inspiration, perseverance, and drive from her communities. Shilo holds a Bachelor of Science in Art Practices and a Master of Science in Educational Leadership and Policy from Portland State University. Welcome, Shilo. I'll turn everything over to you.
Well, hi, hello, everyone. So good to see you. I'm on the Pacific Coast, so it's 10 a.m. here. I know it's a little later for those of you, or maybe some of you are in Hawaii or that other direction, so you're even earlier than me. Um, I know time is a social construct, right? So thank you, Shavis and Stephanie, and everybody who's been involved in creating this Weight Stigma Awareness Week. I really appreciate being involved. Thank you all for being here. Oh my goodness, there's 101 of you. Um, amazing. So yeah, I thought that I would maybe start today, this session. I love speaking to people. I love this topic that I'm going to talk to you about. And it can kind of bring up some feelings. I don't know how your day has been going so far. Maybe you just woke up, maybe you've been up for quite a while, but I wanted to smudge a little bit before we start. This is part of my traditions personally. Some of you may also use smudging as part of your traditions, maybe with other things. I'm going to use white sage, but maybe others use other medicines. If not, let's just take a moment to kind of be quiet and silence our mind a little bit or catch up. Sometimes we leave little pieces of our spirit or our energy around. So bring it back to this moment so we can have this good conversation with each other wherever we are on the planet. So just gonna light this sage really quick. Just have a moment for our hearts. There's a lot going on in our bodies and our personal lives. There's certainly not a lot happening in the world. And it can get really difficult to sit with all of it. And those of you who are on social media or, listen to the media a lot, it can be really overwhelming. So let's just come back to that heart space. This topic can be very difficult. It's very personal to a lot of us. It's also very universal. So feel free to take care of yourself during this presentation or any of the other ones. Get snacks, drink something, take a break if you need to. It's okay. The learning will be there. Shavis said that these videos will be available to watch later. So you can always do them at your own pace. So that's something I really struggle with is pacing myself. Physically, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. So thank you so much for that moment. I just wanted to offer that up and also center myself as well. So hi, I'm gonna share my slides with you and then we're gonna get going. I'm a fairly relaxed presenter. And I am going to have the chat up. So if you have questions and things like that, I may see it or I may not. Shavis and Stephanie are going to be in charge of that. Um, but anyways, they'll let me know if there's some burning questions you all have. Um, so we're going to be talking about body sovereignty and fat liberation, huge topics. I've kind of picked a little thread for us to look at, tease out, during this next hour or so. And kind of talking about navigating eating disorders, healthcare, and the weight of colonization. And so this is bringing talking about colonization, settler colonialism, white supremacy for some of you might be kind of a new topic. For some of you, you are seasoned veterans in understanding these topics, and they likely really impact you in multiple deep personal ways. So, yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about today. In my presentations, I typically have, especially around body sovereignty, I typically have photographs of myself or myself and friends. And this is a way to bring the personal into this work, but also it can be really difficult to find really great fat imagery and representation in ways that feel really good to me. So this is a photo from several years ago when I was working at the Native American Youth and Family Center, and we were doing some boxing with youth, and I just asked a friend to take some badass photos of me. So yeah, that's one image. So our agenda, we have quite a bit on our agenda, but I think we'll get through it. We'll see how many stories I need to tell. I will get to what I'm going to get to in the time we have. Whenever I do this work, and I especially with body sovereignty work, it is in collaboration with my ancestors. So, we work together, and like I said, time is a social construct. So we will get to what we get to. So I'm going to do a land and labor acknowledgement in the next slide. I also have a slide about fast facts about me, mostly like identities. So you have some context of where I'm coming from when I'm speaking. This presentation and ones like this that I give is really coming from a lived experience perspective. The things that I'm talking about are uplifted by research. And I have kind of a love-hate relationship with research where I understand its place and its helpfulness, and it's also part of the colonial project, which I'm going to talk about a little later. So I have some different feelings about it. And then what the fuck is the Colonial Project? I am going to cuss occasionally just because I'm going to do it. And that's part of who I am. And always looking for ways to kind of spice things up, but also how do we displace centering whiteness, right? And centering what's professional and what's proper and things like that. So we're going to look at Dr. Rupa Marya's colonial map, which I think is super helpful in looking at how does colonization sort of intersect with all these other elements that we often talk about. I have a few vocabulary terms I'm going to share with you. And then we're going to get into my body sovereignty project, kind of like what it is super briefly. I do a whole training on my body sovereignty project, but I'm not going to go super deep into it. And then I'm going to talk about some specific areas of experience that I have around eating disorder treatment, Western therapy and EMDR in particular, working with an anti-diet dietitian, and then I've been newly diagnosed with ADHD and am on Vyvanse. So just kind of talking about ADHD, binge eating disorder, Vyvanse, and the sort of connection. And then if I get to this, who knows? Talking about advocating for myself as a super fat person in healthcare. Again, I do trainings just on topping your primary care physician, and I do top my primary care physicians and anyone else that I work with in the medical system. They usually don't know that that's happening, but that's what I'm doing. So that's our agenda for the next hour-ish. And land and labor acknowledgement. I'm sure most of you by now are pretty familiar with what a land acknowledgement is. And it is controversial in Indigenous community, but I'm not going to get into that. But another aspect to that, myself and other community organizers and activists are starting to do is a labor acknowledgement as well. Because, if we're talking about a land acknowledgement being like about re-indigenization and also an anti-colonial act, we also need to acknowledge the labor of our Black and African American friends and family members, our community members, and their ancestors as well, because that labor is tied up with land as well. So, I'm currently on Chinook Multnomah lands, about 35 miles northwest of Portland, Oregon. This is a photograph from a forest that's about 20 minutes west from where I live. And this is a forest that my family has gone picking mushrooms, and my dad has hunted for many decades. It's a really beautiful area. Um, so that's whose land I'm currently on. This land has been shared since time immemorial with many Chinookan bands and a few other bands of Indigenous folks, especially in the winter time. And so wanting to acknowledge that wherever we're at, and I'm a guest because I'm Southern Cheyenne and Arapaho. So wanting to acknowledge the land that I'm on, that I'm a guest here, and that even though I'm here for whatever reasons, I am still keeping Indigenous folks from this area from being who they are fully, from gathering the way they need to, from having access to the natural and first foods that they've always had. I'm impacting that, and so I want to acknowledge that. And we're going to talk about land in this presentation. But Indigenous people, we're here. We're never going to leave. We're never going to be gone. And we are, I've heard a statistic of like Indigenous peoples from around the world, we're helping keep 80% of the land and natural resources that we still have protected. Indigenous folks are doing that. And I mean Indigenous globally, not just from, North America. And I want to acknowledge stolen land and also stolen labor, again, of our Black and African American kin and community members and their ancestors whose labor was stolen, lives were stolen, families were stolen, and to build the vast wealth of this country, and where many of those ancestors and their descendants of today are not benefiting from those resources. So even though our Indigenous community here in the North America and our Black and African American relatives, even though there's a lot that's happened to our communities, we're still here. We're more than thriving. We're in survivance, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, and we're doing amazing things. And we're continuing our culture and our legacy and honoring our ancestors and building healthy families and communities. So again, just wanting to acknowledge that hurt, harm, and trauma with also us being amazing people of survivance. So my question is, whose land are you currently a guest on, unless you're Indigenous on your own homelands, which is awesome. What are your homelands? And how are you, and you don't need to put this in the chat if you don't want to, but how are you supporting Black and Indigenous peoples and communities in your work life, in your personal life? You can share that if you want, or it's maybe something to think about. How am I making my services lowering barriers for Black, Indigenous, and other folks of the global majority? How am I making sure when I present research or do research that I'm including folks that are often not included and doing that in a good way? So, anyways, just I want to acknowledge that and bring that into our conversation today. So a little bit about me. Again, Southern Cheyenne and Arapaho. I'm also Scottish and Irish. I use she or they pronouns. I identify as two-spirit and also indigiqueer. I am super fat, not just fat. I'm super fat, which is basically like being a superhero. Let's be real. And I'm physically disabled and have chronic illness. I use a wheelchair, I use a walker and a cane at different times for different reasons. You can see this really cute photo of me with my beautiful, beautiful dog, Journey. She's wearing her scarf, her granny scarf. And I'm sitting in my wheelchair. And this was for a recent public campaign on Two-Spirit survivance. And I think my photo is still up on a billboard in Northeast Portland on Killingsworth. And it was one of my bucket lists to be on a billboard. Um, and then I'm also a trauma survivor, like many of us here, childhood trauma, as well as some trauma throughout my adult life. I do have binge eating disorder. It has gotten better over the last probably 10 years, but it's something I still live with every day. I'm a small business owner and a proud auntie. And for those of you who like astrology, my son is I'm a cusp Scorpio Sag with a Gemini moon and a Taurus rising. So just a few things about me. There's lots of other stuff. So we're going to jump right in, right, to our topic. So looking at the colonial project, what in the hell does that mean? Right. So the term colonial project refers to, and I'm going to read some of these slides, even though I know people don't like that. I don't know people's access needs in this space, so I'm just going to read some of the information on the slides. The term colonial project refers to the historical and ongoing process of European colonization and its impacts on Indigenous peoples. Notice there's an S on peoples because we're not just one people. In the context of the United States, the colonial project involves the systemic dispossession, displacement and assimilation of Native American and Alaska Native communities. It includes policies and practices such as forced relocations, cultural suppression, and the imposition of Eurocentric structures on governance. And this is a project, and it has never stopped. So, and colonization is global. It looks different in different parts of the globe, but there are a lot of similarities, especially European colonization in North America, Australia, New Zealand, well, North America, including Canada, the United States, and stuff like that. So it's still going on. Similar and connected, anti-Blackness is also a global thing that happens and stuff like that. Just wanting to draw some connections. You might be like, why is Shilo talking about colonization in a Weight Stigma Awareness Week? Well, let me get to it. But I want to give a couple of specific examples of the Colonial Project when it connects with Native American, Alaska Native folks. And a lot of this connects to First Nations folks in Canada as well. So land dispossession, settlers seized Indigenous lands, often under duress or through broken treaties or lying, and things like that. Boarding schools, forced assimilations. My great-grandmother went to a boarding school. Most Indigenous folks uh, it, have ancestors and sometimes parents and grandparents who attend boarding school. There's a massive, massive trauma impact on our Indigenous community. There's lots you can read about it if you want to go into it. Boarding schools really impacted our communities in terms of you're taking small children as young as 4 and 5. My great-grandmother was 4 years old when she was forced to go to boarding school. And they're not, those children were not parented, certainly not parented a traditional way of our traditions of parenting. They were forced to have different names. Their hair was cut. They were forced to speak English. All kinds of things were happening around belief systems and spirituality, massive trauma. There was also a lot of abuse and torture happening, and a lot of children died as well. So really terrible situation. Economic exploitation, disrupting our economies and our traditional practices, leading to a lot of economic hardship and dependence. There's a lot of examples of this. I live in Oregon. What happened to the Klamath folks during termination in the 1950s was heinous and awful. And still that trauma and exploitation reverberates to this day, even though it happened in the 1950s. Legal and political marginalization. So our Indigenous people were and are still subject to discriminatory laws and policies denying us basic rights and autonomy. And then cultural erosion. So making it so that we could not practice our traditional beliefs, languages, spirituality, ceremonies, and our traditional ways, Sundance, Sweat Lodge, potlatch, all of these traditions were prohibited by the US government until 1977. So if you weren't Indigenous, you had your religious, practices that you could do, but it wasn't until 1977 that it was legal for Native people. And we're lucky that we had elders and community members who kept those practices underground so that we could continue them. So again, when we talk about the Colonial Project, how does that, connect to talking about weight stigma, talking about eating disorders? So the way that I see this, and this is me drawing connections, other people may see it differently. It's also a really big topic. So I'm just going over a few kind of threads. Body dispossession. So European settlers seizing Indigenous bodies through stealing children, right? Physically removing our ancestors. This still happens. Building toxic plants on reservations, making it so that people can't live there, they can't drink the water, taking away first foods, little or no access to traditional medicines, gathering areas, and ceremonies. Forced assimilation. I talked about that. Did I just... Okay, sorry. I think I had two of that same slide. So what does this have to do with weight stigma? So looking at assimilation and indoctrination, we're going to take those concepts and widen them. Not just focused on Indigenous people, but we're going to widen them to everyone. Although if you are Indigenous, Black, or another person of the global majority, if you're disabled, if you are trans, non-binary, or someone who has a body that goes outside of the standards of the colonial project idea of what a good body is, then this is for you. So assimilation and indoctrination of the beliefs from childhood through a person's life, and done through families, religion, healthcare systems, marketing, and news, as well as research, that our bodies must be thin, they must be white or as white as possible. You must be completely healthy the whole time, no illness, right? Or if you are ill, it's like, a cold or something like that. We're indoctrinated, can't age, right? You're supposed to age gracefully, whatever that means. Economic exploitation. I talked about this briefly with Indigenous peoples, but we see it with us too. It's a favorite tactic of colonization because of its tight link to capitalism. Fat people, as well as others with bodies that do not adhere to colonial standards, are forced to pay high prices, right? And prices are literally money. Prices could be lack of access to care. Prices could be death or earlier death. Prices could be not getting the diagnosis you need, dealing with microaggressions, could go on and on. For services, equipment, treatment, medication, etc., that others don't have to pay for, right? So we can see this as the fat tax, the super fat tax. The fatter you are, the more expensive things are. A disabled tax, pink tax, etc. If you have multiple targeted identities like you're queer, super fat, disabled, Black, or maybe you're Afro-Indigenous, then those taxes are going to keep piling up. There's also a lot of expenses tied to the pursuit of thinness, being young, and not aging, being perfect, having perfect health, etc., perfect fitness, that keeps us wrapped up and bringing money into these systems and lining the pockets of corporations. Legal and political marginalization. Fat people, we are not protected by anti-discrimination laws unless you live in a couple of cities, or I think there's one state, and I can't remember the state. Sorry, I think it's on the East Coast, who have some protection for anti-discrimination laws, but we do not have anything national. In Oregon, we don't have any of those laws. We're impacted in many ways, leading to subpar medical care. I mean, the bar is so freaking low. It's like, I think it's below the ground at this point. Difficulty in getting and maintaining housing, employment, including getting a job, maintaining the job, getting training, moving up, and pay equity. Services, and just enjoying travel and recreation of all kinds. So again, we see this as perfection, 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 perfection. And guess what? Humans are never perfect. And some other aspects, controlling people's bodies, especially those assigned female at birth, disabled folks, two-spirit, trans, non-binary, and other people with bodies that don't conform to colonial standards for a variety of reasons, right? You need to be controlling your body. You have control over it. If you are too fat, it's your fault. There's something wrong with you. Pervasive and false beliefs that we have 100% control over our sexuality, our body size, our like physicalness, whatever. There's multiple things around that. Our health outcomes, which we know is not true. We have very little control over our health outcomes. This false belief then becomes entangled within us. And I think about it often as like an invasive species of plant, right? That just, has gotten into my brain and my body. And I'm just constantly picking it, right? Weeding that nastiness in my brain and my body. I'm just constantly weeding it out and tossing it out. And then it just keeps growing because we live in this, colonial project, this colonial atmosphere, this capitalist atmosphere that just feeds it all the time. And dealing with this invasive species of thoughts and all of that, it really can mine our souls, right? Mine us at a soul level. It takes away our mental energy, our physical energy, um, uh, and it helps then build the wealth of the diet, pharmaceutical, anti-aging, healthcare system, insurance companies, yada, yada, yada. I could go on and on. So it gets mined from us, taken from us, and given to them, right? Another way of exploiting and taking resources. If we're thinking of ourselves, right, as sometimes that resource. John Trudell, who's like an amazing thinker, activist in the Native American community. He's passed on to the spirit world now, but he was the speaker of the American Indian movement in the 1960s and 70s. And he talked about being mined, MINED, by colonization. His stuff blows my mind. John Trudell is his name. The other aspect that kind of annoys me and bugs me about the Colonial Project is that humans are objective. We are not objective. Our brains do not work that way. That's why when they do certain studies, they have to put like 3 or 4 layers of control because we are not objective. we would have a really hard time surviving if we were completely objective. So one of the ways that this comes up is that doing research, people who are researchers, doctors, people with PhDs, even sometimes insurance companies, the government, other folks that are creating policy recommendations, tools, equipment, medication, services, that they are unbiased and their opinions, it should say opinions, not options, should never be questioned, that they know better than us, right? Another way of control. So we have all of these layers of control, 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 and then we need to control ourselves. And then there's all these other layers of control, making sure we do that. Then the pursuit of perfectionism to keep us busy, depressed, anxious, whatever. All of these things are happening within this sort of pressure cooker, right? So Dr. Rupa Mehra, or Maria, sorry, she's amazing. She created this very simplified, I mean, it's oversimplified, kind of mapping of how colonization is connected to these other elements within our society. And Stephanie, can you drop the first link on my list this into the chat? This comes from a really great talk that she did for Bioneers. And Stephanie just put the link in there if you want to watch it. At about 9 minutes and 18 seconds is when she specifically starts talking about this. But I would encourage you to watch the whole video of her. It's amazing. It's really cool. So we look at this, we see colonization at the top. Typically, when we're doing DEI work, I sometimes call it corporate DEI work, Jedi work, whatever it is. Oftentimes, that work is not taking colonization into accordance. It just sort of keeps it out of the way. And I think that's on purpose. Whether I'm not saying people who have created DEI are like, let's not talk about colonization. It's more like people are not aware of the colonial project on purpose because it's not supposed to be known. So you have to kind of seek out that information. But if we don't understand the underpinnings of colonization, we can only go so far in our work. It makes it very difficult to do liberation work, maybe impossible, I don't know. Very difficult to do liberation work, very difficult to do abolitionist work if we do not understand colonization. Very difficult to do systemic change or make new systems, right? Maybe we should just implode the old ones. I don't know. But we need new ones to help people. So when here we see colonization connected to supremacy, multiple types of supremacy, white supremacy, male supremacy, or also known as patriarchy, and human supremacy, right? That human beings are the supreme beings on this planet and in the universe. Not the case in my spiritual beliefs, right? So when we have those elements of supremacy, they feed into multiple things that are really awful that have happened in the past and continue to happen today, right? So that should say, instead of slavery, it should say enslavement, right? Change wording a little bit, right? So enslavement. Genocide has happened in the past, is still happening today. Invisible labor, right, of all kinds, whether that is Black, Indigenous, and other folks of the global majority dealing with the invisible labor of white folks' feelings and fragility in the workplace or wherever they're at, or the invisibility of a partner who's doing all the work in the household. I mean, it can go on, this sort of invisible labor, right? The invisible labor of fat people who have to constantly educate their doctors, who have to constantly be on alert. Are they going to say something about my weight? Are they going to microaggress me in some way? Like all of all of this invisible labor. Femicide, domestic violence, and child abuse. And then looking specifically at human supremacy and ecocide, right? Exploitation of resources. And all of these aspects somehow make their way to capitalism, right? Or they're somehow extractive or helpful to capitalism. And then capitalism feeds into supremacy, and then it feeds in, so we have these feedback loops, right? And these cause trauma to the planet, trauma to us. And then she talks about inflammation, right? And you can watch her video if you want to learn more about what she means by that. But the really important thing that I want you to see here is all of these aspects of racism, homophobia, sexism, all of the isms is all interconnected. And we have to understand colonization to understand that, right? Otherwise, I think for a lot of people, it just feels like these little buckets of like isms that we need to be concerned about, right? But they're all interconnected together. That's where the studying is, right? So anyways, I just wanted to show this to you. The other thing I want to bring up is that when we're talking about eating disorders, when we're talking about weight stigma, when we're talking about any ism or anything like that, it is genocide that these things lead to. They have led to genocide in the past, and we are currently seeing genocide now, whether that's in Gaza, Yemen, in South Sudan. I mean, I have a list, Myanmar, Ethiopia, Syria, Afghanistan, Pakistan, like, and there's more, right? And I don't mean to be really depressing, but we have to understand that doing this work that we're doing impacts what's happening in other countries. That eating disorder work and that perfectionism and control and hatred of ourselves and others bleeds into and can move up almost like, I think there's like a triangle that shows, discrimination, and then it gets worse and worse and worse, and then we get to genocide, right? So these things are all linked together. So when we're talking about this, we also needed to be talking about genocide and what we are doing to help with that, right? Because they're linked together. Looking at, I'm changing now a little bit into vocabulary. Looking at anti-colonial versus decolonization. So this is my opinion and how I do things. You can do and be whoever you want, but I want to offer this. The word decolonization is a buzzword at this point, and I've seen it used in a lot of weird ways. So like I've often seen it like we're going to decolonize dating, and I'm like, well, what the fuck does that mean? Like what does that mean? Like as a Cheyenne person, decolonizing dating is going back to two-spirit people helping people date. And I'm not going to go into it, but Cheyennes have a lot of like traditional cultural beliefs that after the age of 8, boys and girls don't interact with each other. So how are you going to date when you're not supposed to talk to each other? Right? That's the two-spirit person helps with that, right? So like that's where my mind goes. I'm like, what the hell does that mean? Right? What does decolonizing housing mean? Are we going to live in, like, as a Cheyenne person, are we going to go live in teepees? Sounds great. I mean, there's definitely some things I would miss, but I've lived in a teepee for, during ceremonies, and I loved it. So I prefer the term anti-colonial, right? I feel like it covers in a way that colonial project, those standards better, right? That's me. If you want to learn more about the word decolonization and a particular perspective on it, Stephanie, if you could put that second link in for Decolonization is Not a Metaphor by Tuck and Yang. It is free on the internet. It is like deep, and it comes from an Indigenous perspective. And basically it talks about decolonization really is about giving land back. Right? So I prefer anti-colonial. This also is a piece of artwork I created from Cheyenne ledger art from the 1800s. And I just used my digital program and put some really bright neon colors in there, but this was drawing from the 1800s, and I just kind of drew over it. So just a different way of bringing those cultural traditions, excuse me, into a modern context. So survivance. This is that part where I'm talking about here's this horrible, shitty shit stuff that's happening and has continued to happen. And I don't understand why humans, we can be so brilliant and loving and amazing and so horribly wretched at the same time. But thinking about the idea of survivance, okay, we've got trauma, we've got these things that have happened to us that can continue to happen to us. What do we do about that? How do we not sit in the misery of that? And so for me, survivance has been a concept, a thing, an action that has really helped me in my life. So Anishinaabe scholar and writer Gerald Visner, who's written a lot of books. So if you're really into this topic, look him up. He wrote about the definition of survivance. Now I'm going to read this definition to you, and you may be like, what the hell does that mean? But don't worry, I'm going to talk about it. So he says, quote, an active sense of presence, the continuance of native stories, not a mere reaction or a survivable name. Native survivance stories are renunciations of dominance, tragedy, and victimry. Survivance means the right of succession or reversion of an estate, and in that sense, the estate of native survivancy. So the thing is that it's an Indigenous concept, therefore it is difficult to explain in English. But let's see what we can do. When Visner's talking about this concept, he's encouraging us to shift from a narrative of being a victim to one of empowerment that is going to celebrate our ongoing resilience, creativity, and adaptability as Native peoples in the face of history, and contemporary challenges that we're facing, right? So, and by resilience, I don't mean, oh, you're doing so good navigating systems that are harming you as a fat person, right? I mean finding ways to bounce back, right? Finding ways to get around systems, to be a part of community, and get some of that help and sheltering from community. Survivance, spoken by Visner, is not just about enduring, right? That's a terrible life. It's about actively shaping and reclaiming a narrative that affirms the rich and diverse heritage of Indigenous cultures. So when I think about survivance for me as a super fat person, I think about how do I reframe my body for myself? How do I rethink this outside of the colonial norms, right? That's really difficult to do, and I can't do it 100% of the time. But how could I frame this? How can I work with my community? How can I work with my ancestors? How can I work with my cultural and spiritual beliefs to make that happen for me? Right. And to remind me as I navigate through this system, these systems that really just want to eat me up, right? And harm me. And not just me as a fat Indigenous person and two-spirit, but all of us, right? I'm giving you Indigenous perspective, but I'm saying there's alternatives to what the colonial project is giving us. You just need to find the one that works for you if you want to do it. So I want to talk a little bit really quick about body autonomy versus body sovereignty. So I use the term body sovereignty, and I have reasons for that. Body autonomy, from when I sort of looked it up, really is something that's a key principle for reproductive justice. The United Nations uses it in their work. There's nothing bad about it at all. It can sometimes be taken to mean something different, and co-opted. But basically, when I looked up some definitions, it's the right to make decisions about one's own body, life, and future without coercion or violence. It's a fundamental human right and a core tenet of international medical ethics. So when I read that, does anybody else feel some cognitive dissonance in that? Right? So I think like United Nations, I'm gonna to read this part. Bodily autonomy means my body is for me. My body is my own. It's my power and it's about agency. It's also about choice and it's about dignity. Body autonomy is a foundation for gender equality. And above all, it's a fundamental right. But what does that mean when we are fat people, disabled people, chronically ill people, trans people, non-binary people who are navigating medical systems or trying to get jobs or housing? Body autonomy doesn't exist for us, right? And so they're using it in a very specific way around reproductive and gender justice, which is okay. That's totally fine. But when I'm talking about it and others, I think we're talking about it in a bit of a more expansive and sometimes more personal space around how our bodies are impacted by systems, um, and impacted by systems that are oftentimes seen as healthy, right? As helpful. If I think about the UN's like, oh my gosh, like body autonomy so that, people who are able to give birth can give birth or they can choose not to give birth. We need to get people the medical care that they need to make those choices, right? Like contraceptives, things like that. That's really important. And we're also talking about a system, a healthcare system that also is very terrible and violent and ignores people and puts labels people too, right? So it's that cognitive dissonance of that. I'm not saying that this is a bad word or that these things are happening or not good. I'm saying that we're seeing things different on multiple levels. It's the both and framing instead of the sort of this or that. It's both and. It can be both helpful in some contexts for people and like life saving, and in other contexts, the healthcare system can just be absolutely awful. So when I'm talking about body sovereignty, and I think that body autonomy and body sovereignty, there's a lot of overlap there. Um, the reason why I personally use it is that when I was going through a lot of shit in graduate school and after graduate school, and my ancestors were helping me with figuring out a healing process for myself, which ended up being my body sovereignty project. I'm just doing a time check really quick. Oh my gosh. Oh, time. It's so hard. Colonial time sucks. Um, anyways, I think this is an important context for you all to have. Um, Sovereignty specifically is about the authority of the state to self-govern. So is body autonomy. So is autonomy. I got the body sovereignty phrase from a two-spirit poetry book called Walking with Ghosts by Quoli Driscoll, who's Cherokee. I love this poetry book. I think it's beautiful. And it really helped me in my healing process. And that's where I found the term body sovereignty and was like, yes. So when I think about the idea of what does body sovereignty mean to me personally, in the context of re-indigenization, within and outside of colonization, right? I want to make a liminal space, a special space for myself, and maybe a space I can connect to other people, right? Where I can get a little bit of protection from the constant inundation of the patriarchy, of colonization, of the diet industry, of healthcare, blah, 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 blah. So I reframe and remind myself of this all the time, that my body is sacred because creator told me this, because my ancestors said, right? My body is a gift from creator and thousands of prayers of my ancestors. This is my belief, doesn't necessarily need to be other people's beliefs. I'm just sharing. My ancestors are my life collaborators and they fully support my healing. They don't care what I look like, what I weigh, what car I drive, how much money I make, what my health is. They want me to be happy. They love me. They want me to support and love the communities I'm a part of and to be part of healing for other people in the ways that I can. I have a sovereign right to my body, to my sacred responsibility to it, to my connection, and to all the choices about my body. That is a sovereign right for me outside of the colonial mandates, demands, control, assimilation tactics. Right? So when I'm making choices about my body, I have to kind of go through some questions about, is this kind of what I want to do or what they're asking me to do? Is that kind of based in colonial bullshit? Or is this actually something that's going to work for me? And I might have that conversation with my ancestors because I talk to them. That's just me. And they'll let me know, right? Body sovereignty is my survivance, and it exists outside of colonial understanding and imagining. I don't have to, I don't have to have the support of research about sovereignty and about this work. I don't give a shit what other researchers or whoever think about this. It doesn't matter to me. What matters is my relationship with my body and my ancestors and the community I'm from, my found family. That's what I care about. Now, if researchers want to research this or whatever, I would kind of be like, I probably wouldn't read the research because who knows who they are and what narrative they have and lens and blah, blah, blah. But I don't need research or Western knowledge bases to say, oh, yes, this is the way to go, Shilo. I don't need that. No, thank you. So my body sovereignty project. This came out of a really awful, traumatic time where I was super depressed. Nothing was helping me. I was I was suicidal, to be honest. It was really a hard time for me. And I reached out to my ancestors and I was just like, look, this is my plan. This is what I'm thinking about doing. I just wanted to check in with you. And the ancestors were like, okay, Miha, you can do whatever you want. Like, it's your choice. Bodies, I didn't know the term body sovereignty yet, but they were like, but if you don't want to do that, there's things that we can do, right? So after several conversations with my ancestors, smudging, right? Praying, drinking water, things like that. My ancestors, and there's a photo of some of my grandmas, 3 generations of grandmas down towards the bottom of the slide. They were like, we love you. And here are some things that you could do. And so I just talked with them and I was like, okay, these are the things that are really bothering me and causing me a lot of pain and suffering. And so we talked and I was like, okay, how about a project? I like a project. And it would help me to have some like elements of it or some parts so I can kind of like simplify it a little bit or contain it because it feels really wild and big and overwhelming. So that's where it came from, my body sovereignty project. It's never done. It's something I'm always working on, which I don't find overwhelming and depressing. I actually like it. And so there's 3 elements to it, and all of these elements fold together, but I just needed some separation. Healing my relationship with food. Embodiment through joyful movement. I have been disassociated from my body most of my life. Healing from sexual trauma. So there are many things that I've done under these 3 categories. Many things. So I can't go into all of the things, but you're definitely going to hear some of them. But I wanted to this picture of my grandma's. The little girl is my great grandmother. She's the one I was telling you about that went to boarding school. She went to boarding school about 2 years after this photo was taken, which is in the late 1800s in Oklahoma. And then this woman on the right is my great great grandma. So that would be my great grandmother's mom. And then the woman to the left is my great great grandma's mom. So my great 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 grandmother. So this grandma on the left, she lived to be well over 100 years old. And when she was growing up, settlers were just starting to come to the Midwest. So she, in her lifetime, saw um, some horrible stuff and everything change on her in her life. But I love this picture of them. They're so sweet and so beautiful. And all of my ancestors, the ones pictured here and not pictured here, have been so, so good to me, especially in times where I've struggled to believe myself, and to honor myself. I feel like I can believe in and honor them, which then kind of honors myself, right? In a roundabout way, because we're all interconnected. So thinking about eating disorder treatment, and I'm just again looking at the time. I've got a few more minutes. The good, the bad, and the what the fuck. I did not get a lot of eating disorder treatments, for my binge eating, which really started, I think, when I was about 20. I had experienced a traumatic experience, and I'd had, um, I'd had disordered eating most of my life because I was put on diets starting at the age of 10. So that really impacted my relationship with food, my relationship with my body, like all that, blah, 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 right? Um, but the binge eating, I kind of remember the moment that it started. I ate a whole thing of Whitman's chocolates, like the big box, in like one setting. And I remember thinking, wow, this is like something has changed. I've moved into something different. Um, and so um yeah, so I would look up binge eating. I was never diagnosed with binge eating for years and years and years, but I was like, pretty sure I have it. And just because, I knew how much I was eating and all of that. And I could not find anything that didn't have to do with weight loss. And I was really confused about that. And this was before I really understood fat liberation, and things like that. I just had this sort of like internal knowing. Maybe it was my ancestors already having that conversation with me. But I remember I did go to a quote support group, and I put it in quotes. And the support group was for, and I'm gonna just content note, I'm gonna talk about this group a little bit, so you can mute me until I'm done talking, if you don't want to hear it. But it was a support group for people who were going to or had had weight loss surgery. And I was thinking about it, about getting weight loss surgery. And because I had been convinced that that's what I needed to do to, live longer or whatever. And so it was real weird. It was at the basement of this like mental health clinic. And so it was all folks who were assigned female at birth. And there was some people there, who had had like lap band and stuff, who, had quote gained weight back and all this stuff. And it, I liked the people. I didn't particularly find it helpful, in any way, really. But it was nice to hear people's stories. It was nice to connect to people. But the person who the counselor who facilitated it, I think we had to meet with her like once or twice a month, one-on-one, and she just really didn't understand the fat experience. She also, I don't think, ever diagnosed me with binge eating disorder, or asked me about any of that, because again, it was a support group for weight loss, and to get weight loss surgery. And I'm also just kind of like, isn't it? It's not a good idea to get a weight loss surgery and have an eating disorder. Like that sounds like, well, I mean, I think weight loss surgery sounds like a terrible idea, but like the two together sound like even more terrible. And also, if you're someone who's gotten weight loss surgery in the past, like I love you, no judgment on you. Like it's fucking hard out there. I'm just saying, it's kind of a scary option. So anyways, I didn't end up getting weight loss surgery, but what really made me leave was when I had a conversation with the clinician, and I said something about being fat was like a lifestyle, and she was completely confused. And so I was trying to explain to her, and I didn't have the vocabulary then of the fat tax, right? And of all the shit and weight stigma that you're dealing with. And she had no clue. And I maybe she had no clue because she was just always telling people to lose weight. So she never really got to know what it was like on the fat experience. I don't know, but it was just a huge, massive red flag to me. And I was like, nope, I'm never coming again. So that stopped that. And then I eventually came across body trust and a body trust provider. And I think it's through ASDA that I was kind of doing some work with ASDA, and I was like, huh, body trust provider, interesting. And I met someone who was a body trust provider, and I think we met up for like maybe 9 months. And it was so incredibly helpful and impactful and beautiful and loving. And it was the first time that anyone ever explained to me that the binge eating cycle has restriction. And I was like, no, no, it doesn't. Like, and she was like, no, it really does. And I was like, no, it doesn't. Like, I don't restrict food. I eat too much. And then she asked me questions. And then I started to reflect. And I was like, holy shit, I do restrict at times, right? Because it's part of that cycle. No one had ever said that to me. Also, I know the DSM still does not have that in its diagnosis, which annoys the shit out of me. But like, let's add it to the list of things that annoy me about eating disorders, DSM, mental health, and healthcare. I'm sure you all have a long list too. So that was really profoundly interesting to me and like, whoa. And then I just saw it everywhere in my behavior. And then I remember one time she said to me, when we're doing this body trust work, we're looking for C-level work. And I'm someone who graduated, summa cum laude, right? And have perfectionist aspects, right? To my what is it? Trauma recovery fawning, like people pleasing recovery stuff. I'm a lot better at it. But I was so perplexed by that. And she was like, yeah, perfectionism is part of the problem, right, with eating disorders. And so she's like, we're looking for C-level work. And I had to really think about that. I had to really contemplate what are my feelings about doing C-level work? And that's when I started to think more about what I knew about the Colonial Project and about perfectionism. And I was like, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. So I made some connections there. And it was really, really profound. And I loved working with a body trust provider. I love the Center for Body Trust. I think they do amazing work. And it has been massively helpful to me. And I found it just through ASDA. Like, again, no doctors said anything, no providers said anything, no mental health counselors said anything. Like, you know, and then a quote from me, I was talking to a friend recently. We weren't talking about this topic, it was something different, but I was like, perfectionism is colonization personified, right? And that's not to make anybody feel bad if perfectionism is an issue and a struggle. It's just to say it's probably a struggle because of colonization. It's not you, it's colonization, right? And it's part of a healing process. Also, another great selfie of myself. I'm just gonna say, um, I look very like I like to take silly selfies too. So Western therapy and EMDR has been a massively, amazingly helpful to me. From a trauma, like a complex PTSD place, but we've also used it for looking at dieting trauma and dieting rules that have been kind of stuck in my head. Again, that invasive species. I feel like EMDR, instead of me trying to pull out the weed little by little, EMDR is like this, I don't know, machine or like amazing process that just like zaps it all. And it for the most part doesn't grow back. Or if it does, it's little here and there and I can actually pull it myself, right? So love EMDR, wish more people would get certified to do EMDR and techniques like that. I have an amazing therapist. Love her. She might watch this later. And she also uses internal family systems, which I find really helpful. And really helpful with EMDR in particular. I'm a very visual storyteller, obviously a storyteller, visual, spatial thinker, creative. So internal family systems and the visualization of the different parts of myself works really well for me. Um, we have used anti-colonial practices within therapy. It's usually me bringing it up. Not that my therapist, you know, isn't good at amazing things. She's also a white lady. So she's doing her own work. And she has been nothing but supportive. When I was first starting EMDR and I asked, can I call in my ancestors when we do this? Because when I first started EMDR, we were in person before the pandemic. And I also brought an eagle feather with me to hold. It's a sacred object. It's when we sometimes we say our prayers, we can hold an eagle feather, we can smudge with an eagle feather. And so I just wanted to do that EMDR work because I was nervous about it and how I was going to feel about it with the support of my ancestors and an eagle feather. We also, for some of the techniques that you use to sort of help with like emotional flooding and things like that. I can't remember what it's called. We used Cheyenne words for that. So if I get emotional flooding, then I say the Cheyenne word for I love you. And it helps calm me down right away. And she was great. She learned those words so that we could integrate that. And I did, I think it was probably 6 months ago, maybe a little longer. We did a whole EMDR set of sessions on dieting trauma from when I was a teenager. And when I was in the summer between 10th and 11th grade, I went to Jenny Craig. And I have a lot of feelings about that whole experience, but we used EMDR to explore it. And I remember, and as we were doing it, she was having me, you have like an anchor image or whatever, or whatever. And I remember with Jenny Craig, you always had to like see your person, whatever, that was like tracking your weight and your measurements and all the stuff. And then you went into the little classroom and had to watch a video of Jenny Craig, right? Talking to like whoever. And I remembered her like her ugly leisure wear. She'd have her like pink, like workout outfit. She'd be walking, on the beach of La Jolla, California, and all this stuff. And so I remember talking to my therapist about like that was stuck in my mind, right? So we did some really good work around that. And I found out that the like what 17-year-old Shilo, 16-year-old Shilo was like part of me was still stuck in that and stuck in that clinic. And so we had a few sessions of me going in and talking to my younger self, and it was really fascinating. It was really interesting. It was good, deep work. So I've also seen an anti-diet dietitian. She's amazing. Her name's Lucy. I highly recommend going to one if you want to. I think one of the things I love so much about Lucy, besides her being anti-diet, is and like pro-fat, pro whatever your body size is. She used a lot of imagery and storytelling to help me understand the connections between foods. I think as someone who's been through a lot of dieting, um, since a really young age, like dieting programs. I don't know what's true and what's not anymore, and I don't trust that knowledge. I remember one of the things I really loved is how she was telling me how carbs are important, right? Like carbs, our body wants to, like that's our body's preferred energy source is carbs. And so she was talking about how carbs and protein are best friends. And so if you eat protein and then some carbs, it will help, level out your blood sugar. And I mean, she was oversimplifying it a little bit, I'm sure. But I just loved the imagery of like how they were friends. And so for me, when I would then go to cook something, I would think about, okay, So how do I mix carbs and protein together and maybe some fiber in a way that they'll have a great time, like a party kind of, right? And then that goodness and that celebration then gets into my body. Right. So I love that way of reframing this in a way of and maybe it's just me being very whimsical, but to me that was really healing. And it was something that I could grapple onto and believe to be true, right? And so that's one of my favorite things that she ever told me. And then I never had to worry about her microaggressing me. I never had to worry about her saying something fat phobic or in any kind of weight stigma kind of way, and I could just relax. I could really listen to what she had to say and not be defensive, not wait for that. I mean, I would say the first couple appointments, I was probably a little bit like weary, like leery of her because I didn't know. But then quickly I learned like she's freaking amazing. So there's something about that type of relationship, whether it's with an anti-diet dietitian or when you're talking your primary care provider or someone else, like there's something really beautiful about not having to have that worry, that defensiveness, that exhaustion, right? Of that just waiting, right, for what's going to happen. So the other thing I wanted to briefly mention, and then I'm gonna oh gosh, we need to do Q&A. I need like 5 hours, right? Would anybody be down for me doing one of these trainings for like 3 hours? We would of course take a break. But so I was recently diagnosed with ADHD, but the combined type, both uh inattentive and what's the other one? Hyperactive. Um, I was surprised by the hyperactive because I don't really see myself as hyperactive. But then the woman who was assessing me was like, you told me you talk a lot, you like interrupt people, you're constantly thinking, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, okay, thanks. That we're good. You don't need to continue. Anyways, so I went to see her to get to see if I had ADHD. I thought I probably did. And then and also like I saw somewhere on TikTok, someone was like, huh, so it's ADHD and not a character flaw. And especially around the binge eating, because my therapist, my regular, therapist Kit, who's amazing, she was like, I wonder if there's a lot of connection between ADHD and binge eating disorder, and stuff like that. So I ended up going and getting evaluated, and she evaluated me for binge eating disorder and then for ADHD. And she told me for the ADHD, um, it could like take like 2 or 3 sessions. And then she like diagnosed me in like 20 minutes. And I was like, anyway, so I've been on Vyvanse for like 3 or 4 months, and I take 50 milligrams. I mean, I could say a lot about the process, and what it's been like for me. But if we specifically think of, because I get it's the only medication that I guess they say treats binge eating disorder, or not, but treats it, is preservation of character. What is that? Is perseveration? I'm not sure. There might be somebody else in this group who knows if perseveration is a characteristic of ADHD. I don't remember that being the case, but yeah, sorry. I want to stay in my wheelhouse. Um, maybe hyperfocus, if it's hyperfocus, maybe. So what I notice in terms of this is just my experience with binge eating disorder and Vyvanse, is that because the Vyvanse helps me, like instead of having like 25 tabs open in my mind, I have like 3 and I can navigate those tabs really well. I still have terrible memory stuff, and I think it might be medication and trauma, but um I think it just gives me the capacity and the maybe organization in my head to decide what I want to eat. Also, I think it helps a bit with if I'm having a lot of big feelings or stressed out or starting to disassociate or something like that. It's a little bit easier for me to engage in that conversation with myself, like ask myself some questions about like what is it that you're really needing in this moment? Do you need like to snuggle with Journey, my dog, or do you want to eat that, whatever it is, blah blah blah. So have a little bit more of those conversations. I also noticed that I can hear and detect my hunger and full cues better because there's not so much chaos in my head. Again, might just be me. Um, I just am able to connect with my body better. I still struggle with feeling hungry. Like I have to often look at the clock and be like, okay, it's been like 5 hours since I ate something. I should be hungry. And then it can take anywhere from 15 minutes to 30 minutes for me to actually feel hungry. Um, after I've sort of given that cue to my mind. And then some people say that they eat a lot on Vyvanse or they don't eat enough. That has not been my experience. It hasn't really impacted my appetite at all. I think it's the same. It's just I feel so the other thing about and I don't know if this is binge eating related or just ADHD, I would focus on eating the same foods over and over and over for like weeks or months on end. And I think there's a few reasons for that. Um, they tend to be safe, they feel safe foods. I don't have to make a lot of decisions about it. There's not anxiety because I know what I'm going to eat. Like, you know what I mean? I have to make choices. But I feel like with the Vyvanse that I actually can make choices a lot easier. It's not overwhelming. It's exciting to try something different. Whereas I would be like, so that's changed. The other thing I would say with Vyvanse and maybe any other ADHD medication is it obviously doesn't fix your ADHD. I think it makes it a little easier for you to manage your symptoms a bit better. But for me, I have to set an intention of what I'm going to focus on for the day, especially in the mornings when I first take it, or else I will focus on whatever is in front of me. That could be like my dog. It could be TikTok. It could be staring at the wall, like, whatever is in front of me. If I don't make that intention, then I'm kind of screwed for the day potentially. Um, and also, it's so fucking weird to take a stimulant and be exhausted, like tired afterwards. Like I need to take a nap. And then the other thing is, I found I really have to be really careful about my sleep patterns, going to bed at the same time, getting up at the same time, and then also eating lots of protein. I get angry a lot more than I ever have, and irritable and annoyed, um, and having emotional regulation issues a lot more significantly throughout the day. So, okay, I think that's about it. I'm not going to get to I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. I'm not gonna get to the sort of like aspects of like topping your primary care physician. But I'll do some other, trainings on that. But yeah, I just wanted to see if there was any questions out there, Shavis. I see that there's
Yes.
three.
Yeah, and our good friend Reagan will be talking a lot about those issues. So fortunately, she'll be able
Oh,
to,
that's right. That's right. Right, right. Yes, 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 yes.
right, sort of put
So
there
thank you
about how
so much.
to, right. So we do have a couple of questions. The first one is just a question for later, so I don't forget as a fellow ADHDer. How do you navigate feelings that come up around the relationship with the body as it intersects with physical disability?
That's a really good question, Angel. That's an ongoing process. Um the internalized ableism is really hard. And it oftentimes intersects and is activated with internalized fat phobia. They can kind of play off of each other, like I'm disabled because I'm fat, and and so um, I it's something I talk about a lot in therapy. It's something we've my therapist and I have been continuing to address in therapy. One thing that I've had happen, I with physical mobility, I don't know what's wrong with my body other than I have a lot of systemic inflammation. I've been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, but who really knows? And so I often feel like my muscles are like walking through concrete, especially if I'm walking for like half a block, they'll start to kind of seize up. And if I don't have a walker or somewhere I can sit, I will have a panic attack because I'm worried I'm gonna fall or whatever, and that's never happened to me, but it will happen. And so we've used EMDR to kind of address that, and it's gotten better. It's not gone away, it's gotten better. But that disability aspect is really difficult. Being a part of disability community has been super supportive to me. The Uprise Collective, and I don't have you can just Google them. I'll put their name. The Uprise Collective, based out of here in Portland. They do a lot of disability justice work. They have a disability justice coffee hour for anybody in the world. It's Zoom based, and you can just come to it. And it's usually just open for whatever folks want to talk about, but it gives disabled folks like an hour to just kind of share with each other. So, yeah, that's one thing I would work on.
That's a really great resource. Thanks
Yeah.
for sharing that. Yeah. Um, the next question is an April 10th, 2024 episode of All Things Considered on NPR said that big food is fueling the anti-diet movement. What do you know about that? And that, uh, I don't know, I was annoyed by that. Not by the question. I was annoyed by some of the things that I saw on social media speaking to this episode, because I guess there were dietitians who were talking about being a part of the anti-diet movement and were also taking money, as I understand it, from big food. That has not been my experience of any dietitians that I know of in the uh, anti-diet movement. So I don't know what your thoughts are about that,
I've
Shilo.
not heard about that at all. I'd be very surprised about that. I wonder about where that's coming from and like what's the intention of that conversation and of that investigation. You know, I wonder, yeah, it seems to me as if maybe it's a um like I mean whatever conspiracy theories, but like it seems to me like there's some intention of maybe um Shanice, you know what I'm trying to say, like
Yes,
discredit
trying to,
anti-diet dietitians
yes,
by saying,
yeah,
oh, they want everybody to eat all of this food and
right,
fast food and yada yada yada, which
right. I
whatever,
think
eat
it
what the hell you want,
comes
you know.
in part from some of the food addiction places, community, where there's a feeling that those of us who believe that sort of all foods fit, that, we are saying, you should go out and eat Keebler's chocolate chip cookies every day, all the time. And that's not, in fact, what is meant by all foods fit. Of course, people have things that aren't great for their individual bodies. And it goes back to your piece around body sovereignty and deciding on what foods do work for you and how you want to approach your body and your relationship with food. And the fact that we've all been, our culture, and the reason that your talk is so important is that our culture was built on all of these things that happened so long ago. and that, settlers, colonizers imposed on to people, and it grew from there. So we're not, sometimes there's this feeling of like, oh, we're hanging on to the past and blaming and so forth. The more knowledge we have, the better we do for ourselves and for others. So history, as a person who's interested in political
Yeah.
science and history, we must know our history and we must understand how it impacts through generations. So
Yeah.
I really
Yeah.
appreciate all that you've shared with us today. And I also really appreciate just how vulnerable you've been, because it takes a lot to share your individual story, to talk about, you know, medications you take and illnesses that you may be dealing with and all of it. It's a lot. And I hope you don't have a vulnerability hangover. Um,
I don't. I
okay.
have really good boundaries with myself.
Good.
My ancestors and I talk about it. I
Excellent.
also have a podcast with my best friend, Your Two Spirit Aunties podcast. Steph, you have a link for that, I think.
If
If
not, we'll put
anybody,
one up. Yeah.
yeah, if anybody, I mean, Brianna and I talk about this topic, disability, survivance, all these topics that I talked about today in depth. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a courage and a beauty in vulnerability and being authentic and sharing those stories. And that's part of my body sovereignty project. My ancestors were like, you need to share your process with others. And I'm really careful about not sharing too much, but I trust you all and I believe in the goodness of people. And if it helps anyone or is supportive to anybody, like it's so worth it. But I just really love all of you so much. And I'm so happy that you're here and that you're coming to this weight stigma awareness week. And Shavis and Steph, thank you again for inviting me and letting me speak about my experience and my perspective. Yeah, I just feel a lot of love from everyone. And it's been a rough couple weeks and I just feel a lot of love. So thank you all, everyone, so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we adore you and love you. And I hope that everyone really enjoyed this today. And uh, do you want to just give your website real quick? Because I know
Yeah,
you
I would.
have a lot on there that's very valuable.
Yeah, and then Shilo M. George at Gmail if you need to get a hold of me for some reason. But yeah, love you all so much and thank you for being here. And yeah, I see Vyvanse is here. Just wanted to say hi.
Great. All right.
So
Thank
anyway,
you,
thanks
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye, Shiloh.
Bye, thanks.